I will be presenting the presidents in the past 50 years, starting from the 1960s. In 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected president and was a member of the Democratic Party. His plan for economic growth emphasizes on tax cuts that he argued would eventually pay for themselves by increasing the government revenue. His overall policies were a more conservative approach rather than liberal, which is interesting because traditionally the Democratic Party is more liberal today. In 1972, Richard Nixon was elected president. He was a member of the Republican Party. His policies throughout his presidency remained a more neutral representation in his time in office. Later, he resigned as president on August 9, 1974, due to the Watergate scandal. In 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected president and was the member of the Republican Party. His overall policies throughout his 2 terms as president had a conservative approach with his own economy policy called Reaganomics. This policy reduced the growth of the government spending by reducing the federal income tax and capital gains tax, as well as reducing the government regulation. In 1992, Bill Clinton was elected president. He is a member of the Democratic Party and focused on a liberal approach throughout his 2 full terms as president. He began the New Democrat movement, which is a relatively centrist ideological faction with the Democratic Party. From Bill Clinton, he said, "The most successful nations in the 21st century have both a strong economy and a strong defense, with an effective government, thus striving for liberal ideals." In 2000, George W. Bush was elected president, and as part of the Democratic Party, he focused on a conservative ideals for the country's policies. These policies included deficit financial tax cuts, expanding the Department of Education, a new drug entitlement for senior citizens, and nation building in the Middle East. These policies all directed to a conservative direction for the country. In 2012, Barack Obama was elected president. He is a current member of the Democratic Party today. His policies for the country took a liberal approach, policies such as Obamacare, which expanded subsidies for the middle-income families, and taxes, healthcare providers, and higher-income earners. In 2016, our current president, Donald Trump, was elected. He is a member of the Republican Party and has taken more conservative directions. Some policies that he has initiated is decreasing the size of our government by utilizing an agency review. This is a conservative step because it changes the size of the central government. Finally, some of the interesting trends to note is that the flip of the political party at the end of the century swapped both parties in the 1930s and continue to this day, and causing Democrats to be now considered Republicans and vice versa.
The Civil Rights Movement was an important development in the 1960s and still is to this day. In 1964, President Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination of all kinds based off of race, color, religion, and national origin. This gave peoples of minorities a breath of fresh air because it decreased the racial segregation that had faced them in the past. This act is liberal because it creates a bigger government and more individual protections for people. In 1967, the Supreme Court rules that prohibiting interracial marriage is unconstitutional. In doing so, 16 states were forced to reform the laws against interracial marriage. This was a liberal step because it changed the previous laws to benefit the minority groups who were oppressed. In 1971, the Supreme Court in Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education, where it upholds the integration of minorities to public schools. This is a conservative action because it allows the public schools to be unified, thus having less schooling programs that the government spends on. In 1988, Congress passes the Civil Rights Restoration Act, which expanded the reach of discrimination laws and ensuring that they are enforced. This is a liberal act because it gives a broader area of enforcement for the laws placed upon racial discrimination. In 1992, the first race riots occurred in decades, erupting in South Central Los Angeles and caused public uproar. This was a conservative movement because they argued that the policies in favor of their rights didn't inflict much change in their life. In 2003, the Supreme Court upholds the University of Michigan Law School's policy. This includes the idea of diversifying schools to prevent segregation and unification of schools and students in schools. This is a liberal step because it helps aid the minority groups by giving them better education.
In 1963, the Equal Pay Act is passed by Congress, promising equitable wages for the same work, regardless of the race, color, religion, national origin, or sex of the worker. This is liberal because instead of white males driving the workforce and holding higher paid positions, it created an environment in which anyone could have equal opportunity based only on their experience and education instead. In 1970, California adopts the nation's first no-fault divorce law, allowing divorce by mutual consent. This is liberal because divorce beforehand was frowned upon by everyone and found to be the wife's fault. But now to this day, divorce is found to be an open option and no one's fault in the relationship. In 1970, California adopts the nation's first. In 1974, housing discrimination of the basis of sex and credit discrimination against women are outlawed by Congress. This is liberal because women are now given the option to work out of the house without being frowned upon by the community and provide for their family other than the male figure of the house. In 1978, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act bans employment discrimination against pregnant women. This is liberal because women were given the chance to be pregnant at the same time of working at their job. They were looked down upon for working and not taking care of herself as a normal housewife should. But by this ban, they were able to provide for the family while creating a new addition to the family.
Next to happen in 1991, the U.S. Supreme Court rules that excluding women from the draft is constitutional. This is conservative because they were making women unable to have choices the men did to join the war, basically saying women had their place, which was only at home. Next, in 1994, the Congress adopts the Gender Equity in Education Act to train children in gender equity, promote math and science learning by girls, console pregnant teens, and prevent sexual harassment. This is liberal because it opened up a whole new world for those in the female community. Women were able to teach a subject that only superior white men could teach, giving equal opportunity to the woman. Women who were pregnant before marriage were seen somewhat as equals and given help rather than looked down upon. In 2006, the Supreme Court upholds a ban on the prenatal birth abortion procedure. The Prenatal Birth Abortion Ban Act, a federal law passed in 2003, was the first to ban a specific abortion procedure. This is conservative because the Liberal Party doesn't believe in interfering in the woman's rights to choose abortion. Lastly, in 2013, the ban against women in military combat positions is removed. This overturned a 1994 Pentagon decision restricting women from combat roles. This is liberal because women were able to make the choice of their free will to have their part within the war and do as much as the men could. They were given opportunities to fight rather than be a nurse or any other job for women in the war.